So like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about team play. We're going to be talking specifically about optimizing team play. This is a question that was brought up in one of the YouTube comments. Someone was asking about how exactly can I start optimizing my team. Some people have been asking me questions in regards to, I already have a team, what do I do from there? We're going to be looking at some concepts that we've already covered in the past, such as min maxing and potentially some dry runs, something that we covered in the contingency class. We're going to be looking at other concepts as well. Keep in mind, this is still fundamentals. So we're going to be looking at things that are still technically at the lowest level, making sure that everybody can build up on them. Once we start kind of building up on everything, we can move on to more advanced concepts. But for now, this is about starting to optimize your team. So what does that really mean? We're going to be looking at a couple things. First few things, we're going to be looking at team synergy. What can you do to get started on team synergy? Some things that you have to keep in mind when you have your players. Play styles, any type of play style you need to consider when you're picking your team. We're going to have an example near the end so you can really get acquainted to figuring out what that play style is, especially when you're looking at VOD reviews. And then we're going to look at creating a playbook. In order for you to optimize your team, you got to make sure that you have a playbook to fall back on. Okay, the playbook will have to fall into those playstyles that we talked about. And then from there, we can kind of just talk about something that you can do with counterplay and maybe some scouting, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so let's get started right at the beginning. So when we're establishing a team, when we need to make sure that we have a good team, there is something that we look at in the pro play scene as just the core. Okay, there is either a 2-player core, a 3-player core. There might even occasionally be a 4-player core. And the core is simply who are the players that exist within the team that everyone can fall back on. So for example, here I have 3 particular players. We have a controller, a duelist, and a sentinel. They can relate to each other in any which way, but there's some level of trust that is entrusted with these guys. So for example, the controller and the sentinel, they might be a previous duo and they know each other really well. And these two mesh really well with the duelist. And then you can have these 3 over here playing with one another, making sure that everybody else who comes in is able to mix well with these 3. These are the guys that essentially make the team. Everybody else is either playing around them or is making sure that they can fit really well with them. You gotta make sure that you understand who your core is. Again, could be 2, could be 3. It can't be a single player and it can't be all 5. There's not such thing as a 5 core. Okay, there is a really deep entrusted area of where the team is going to be playing around. Okay, and this is where the next little bit comes in. A lot of the times we're going to be looking at different pillars that really encapsulate what a team is about. There's things about leadership and being a good team player, but when I look at most of the teams, and the biggest thing that really pops out at me that crumbles these teams together is trust. Okay, establishing trust, making sure that you can play with one another, making sure that you can play with each other in every which way, being able to trust them to hold an angle for you, being able to trust them that they can hear your voice and still being able to make a play. This is all what falls under trust. Okay, you can make as many plays as you want, but if the player doesn't trust you, it's not going to matter. There's a lot of different ways in which you can start. Using names, maybe first name basis is perhaps the best way to go about it. There's other ways to kind of do that. Some players watch movies. Some players have other things that they do. When I coach collegiates, they like to do things like play basketball. They go work out together. There's a couple things that they do, right? Making sure that you have some way of establishing this pillar will make sure that you guys can keep that synergy. Because team synergy is not just about, oh, I am an aggressive player and this guy that I have is also an aggressive player. We can both play really well. Sometimes that'll happen, but there's going to be a certain situation where both players need to make a decision, and if they don't trust one another, it's all going to crumble and it's going to fall apart. You got to make sure that this is established when you're creating that team, meaning that when you're looking for players for your team, you got to make sure that they fall into this core, make sure that they can fall back on these players, and at the same time there's ways to still build connections with these players. Okay, this is something you should be looking at as a leader, as a captain, as a coach, as someone that's coming into a team. Who is the core that you need to fall into? Who is someone that you need to look towards when you are playing with that team? Okay, keep that in mind. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the different types of playstyles. There's 3. Let's start with the first one. The first one is the aggressive playstyle. This is the playstyle that a lot of players think that they fall into, and I can assure you, you are not. Okay, Valorant is very utility oriented, so you might think that it's really easy to fall into that aggressive playstyle when you're playing within a team. It's something that you might consider something like a ranked play. Okay, a ranked team is going to be very likely very aggressive, very bold in the way that they take their strategies. We're going to be looking at an example of what that aggressiveness really looks like within a team setting. But at the end of the day, an aggressive team is a team that just likes to revolve around explosive strategies, teams that like to really make sure that they can have that swing. And all they're trying to do is make sure that they're always going down and making sure that they're suffocating the enemy team. If you're playing against a really strong, aggressive team and you have nothing against them, you're going to feel like you're running out of options every single time. Okay, so that's pretty much what an aggressive team looks like. Again, we will look at an example of that later, so don't worry too much about what that looks like. The second one is the second side of that coin. It is a passive team. Once again, everyone believes that they fall within one edge of the spectrum. Most of them fall in the middle. But the second part of that spectrum is the passive playstyle. It is a defensive team that basically likes to work around traps. They like to work around a particular area where they can trap the opponent. Potentially, there's maybe like a trip and then everyone can act off of it. Maybe it's an entrance and they have like a little kill box and then they throw a flash and then work off of it. Again, their job is to essentially catch opponents off guard and keep them on their guard and making sure that you can never give them any breathing room when they make a mistake. At the end of the day, when you're playing against passive opponents, your best tool to keep in mind is that they will run out of utility at some point, okay? Because what they're trying to do is making sure that you choke out on your own mistakes. So make sure you're keeping an eye on against a passive team, because these are the types of teams that you're going to see pretty often in, I would say, in just your basic tournaments. They're very likely to exist just because they're trying to kind of read the opponent. And this is where we're going to move on to that middle of the spectrum. This is where most pro teams really lie. I'm not going to lie, it's really difficult to kind of identify one between the next, but there's different levels of how adaptive a team is. And that's what that last one is. The adaptation aspect of a team basically mixes both aggressive and passive strategies. But the biggest thing they look for is those openings, those weaknesses. It's not like the passive team where they're trying to force a weakness, or the aggressive team where they're just going in no matter what. They're looking for something that just clicks and then they just work off of that. We're going to be looking at another example of that. I will make sure to kind of bring it back onto that. But when we're looking at adaptive teams, you're going to notice that this is the most common one because players are very likely to see, oh, they smoked this area one way. Let's try to see if we can rotate. Oh, they threw a bunch of mollies here. There's no reason to push here. Let's leave, right? Adapting on the fly is a really popular way of playing that adaptive playstyle. So those are the big three. With that in mind, we're going to be looking at a small clip. We're going to be looking at one round, okay? And this round is...
I think one of the biggest ways that Heretics want Valorant.
Right here, we're going to be looking, okay, at Team Heretics versus PRX. And what we're going to be looking at is paying attention to how these teams interact with one another. We're going to be looking at over here, paying attention to how these guys on the opposite side, okay, over here at PRX, notice how they play around on attack, okay? Notice how they are very aggressive in the way that they like to take space. They like to look for openings ASAP. And notice how these guys, Team Heretics, also try to counter that same way by playing aggressively, okay? Look at how they like to take space. And notice how they try to hold it. And what I want you guys to keep an eye on is what kind of play style is Heretics? Because I already mentioned aggressive, and it's going to be very apparent. They're a very aggressive team. So I want you guys to just pay attention and tell me what kind of team is Team Heretics.
Unlikely most of the time. Well, Boo, TP close to tiles, he's holding a flash, but guess what? Mindfreak's already
off cannon contact.
No, it's a smoke as well. He's holding the next layer of it. Mindfreak, disgusting work, but Miniboo's still active, still kicking into the fight. Back out of there, using the wall, not quite. To catch him on the heels.
Another situation again, Brent, where the cam contact that you can see them pinging out right now doesn't anticipate somebody going for a wide swing. If that's just a shallow little jiggle to spot anybody in mid, the cam takes contact, paranoia can be used, and Team Heretics can crunch the mid players. But instead, they just swung out fully and took the fight.
Purely W gaming.
So these setups that Heretics are using, not really optimized for the pace and the aggression that Paper X are going to throw in.
We'll see how they adapt over the course of this series.
Spike planted.
So 2v3.
If you've been picking up on it, the
info
caster's
that what
already
he's playing
giving you
towards
some
main
of
there
that,
with an
some
neural
hints.
theft.
But keep an eye on that.
Wall broken. One less thing to really worry about here. Still one hell of a task. Need to rebalance. Levi's going to be forced out wide. Shots need to be landed here by Benji. Flash to set it up. Everybody evacuating. Magnificent once more. And everybody topples. Beautiful supportive utility by Padatech.
All right, so that is the clip. Does anyone want to give me an attempt into explaining what kind of playstyle Team Heretics falls onto? Now, this is without any context of previous rounds, I do agree. But just off of that round, what do you think is their playstyle? And it's important for you as a team member in your team, or just as someone who wants to participate in slightly higher levels of play, to be able to identify the playstyle that not only you fall under, but your team does. So looking at a round is a very strong asset. So who wants to take a gander, I guess, at what type of playstyle this is? Any of them? Anybody?
I do.
Yeah, go for it.
So to me, it looks like Heretics is like more of an adaptive team. Even though they had some initial aggression, they seem to have stopped and like waited for PRX to do something.
Good.
That's what it looked like to me.
Any other takes? Any other guesses? We have an adaptive. Anybody agree with the adaptive playstyle?
I'll be honest, I really wasn't paying attention, but I say defensive because I just heard they had a trap play.
Yeah, okay. A trap play. Okay, that's not bad. Okay, so we're gonna have a guess towards the defensive. Any others? So the answer is they're adaptive. Okay, like I mentioned, it is part of the spectrum. The majority of the teams fall there. Okay, and I'm gonna be showing you some examples of more of those later. But we kind of saw how basically PRX was just taking swings. They were just going for it. Like even the caster was like W gaming, right? They were just going W keying, making sure that they can take swings. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Like paying attention to the way that they take this mid space. Notice how like the Viper just no utility,
Tiles, he's
no
holding
nothing.
a flash, but
They
guess what?
just
Mindfreak's already
Off
in front
cam
of
they
him.
contact.
swing close
No, it's
here.
a smoke as well.
For some reason, they don't really apply anything other than that, right? The guy just swings in.
He's holding the next layer of it.
Gets 2 kills off of that just by swinging that blindly. And it's pretty interesting to see how they just continue off of that. We got a pick. All right, let's continue going.
Disgusting.
It doesn't really matter that they don't know how many there are there. They don't know how many that could be behind. They don't know how many could just react to that.
Work, but many
They
moves.
just keep swinging. That is a form of an aggressive play. Sometimes the smoke is not enough to stop you. No information, even that, not enough to stop you. These are examples of what an aggressive team is. And the adaptive side of it is when you're playing passive, usually you get some areas that you can work with. So for example, you can work over here A main and even B main. These are things, so yeah, you can work with these areas, right? A main and B main, I meant. You can work with these 2 areas, and what happens is that a lot of people tend to mistake that taking that area is aggressive, and therefore you're an aggressive player. Usually when it comes to passive teams, you want to make sure that you have a stronghold that you work with, and you just have to set that up at the beginning. So them starting here aggressively doesn't necessarily mean that they're an aggressive team. They just want to set a little perimeter that they want to work around. Everybody else, however, as you can see, they were just going in and just gunning it down. That isn't like an example of playing aggressive. And if we were to continue looking at the rest of the game, we would see how these guys are really good at just maintaining this playstyle throughout. It's not just a one-off round. They like to do this a lot. Okay, I was looking for a particular round on PRX's side for a game that they do on Split, old comp that they performed with. But all they did is no matter what was in their way, they would just gun it down. They would just W through. And it's really interesting, really fun to watch them for that reason, because it's a lot different. It's a little refreshing considering the amount of passive and adaptive teams there are. But yes, so Team Heretics, really good. And then the second phase of that was noticing how they went from an aggressive, again, solidly holding this down, to we're going to wait until we can see what they're going to do, and then just playing off of that. So that is that example of switching that play style up. Okay. Let's see, moving on to the next one. So now we're going to be looking at the second phase of this whole thing. Let's talk about creating a playbook. So now that you started with your team, you've been playing with them for a couple weeks, and you finally figured out what playstyle you guys really work with. It could be the worst playstyle that you guys ever have figured out, but maybe it just fits you. Maybe you guys are not really feeling like you're a defensive team, but when you look back at the VODs, that's exactly how you are. Okay? Regardless of how it is, you need to make sure you're paying attention, right, to that particular play style and then adapting it onto playbooks. Okay, you need to make sure that you're looking at the right team, however, so I encourage you guys to look at pro games and kind of work around that, because the whole point of it is you should not be starting from scratch. any team that starts from scratch, any team that wants to say, no, I really think my strats are really good, I can promise you there's a lot of holes in them. Okay, I can promise you that anybody that you pick up is going to really quickly mess those up because there's a lot of holes within them. When you are a new team, when you're a team that's not established, when you're a team that's not on payroll, okay, like these tier 1 teams are, you have absolutely no reason to not borrow strats. Okay, scouting is a form of you looking at the strat that looking at a team that fits the strategies that you really like to implement and kind of pay attention to some of the pros and cons of it. Okay, so for example, let's say that I was talking about PRX, right? Maybe that's the type of team that we really like. We looked at the VOD and then we're like thinking, wait, it's not that we're really passive, it's just that we're scared. Okay, if I was given the opportunity to push, I would take it. And it's like, okay, we're gonna just look at an aggressive side. Maybe it's the flip coin of things. Okay, we've looked at FUT before. We've looked at how passive they are once upon a time. We looked at them in one of the previous VODs we've done. Okay, and we've seen of how passive they are. Maybe it's like, okay, us pushing aggressively is really not working for us, but when we set traps, we really shine. Okay, or maybe you're just a team that really likes an overall meta-defining strategy that everybody likes to use, and that's just the adaptive. You got to make sure that you work on the fly, make sure your team is really good at thinking outside the box when they're playing within a round. Okay, so make sure that you're playing within what already works. There's no reason for you to start from scratch. Scout. Make sure you're scouting the teams that you're playing against. Make sure you're scouting the teams you're going to be learning with and learning about. So make sure you're paying attention to that. It's a really important step for teams that are just starting or teams that really, really want to develop further. Okay, and this is where we push into an area that we've already talked about in the past. We've talked about dry running before. We talked about it in the contingency class. I didn't really go over fully in detail. I just described to you what these things were and what the purpose of they were. So for example, dry running is just a matter of just practicing something outside of an actual game. It's something of practicing it just in the server in a completely isolated scenario. And the whole point is that you're working each detail down. There's two forms. There's the macro format and there's the micro format. Okay. Excuse me. When you're working with the macro format, it is important that you look at the big overarching goal of the play. So let's say we're going to be looking at this clip of Sentinels versus Loud. I want you guys to figure out what the big overarching play was for one of the teams. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't matter which one you tell me. This is for anybody that's watching and anybody that's just right now. Tell me what the big objective of this play was. And then after that, what I need you to do is I need you to analyze what the whole point of the micro thing is. And when you're looking at micro, you're looking at each individual player. If you're a player that just wants to improve in ranked and you're borrowing strategies from a particular player, look at what they do. Look at what the purpose of that was in relation to the big play. So for example, let's say the macro play was just an A execute. What exactly is TenZ doing during that entire play? Okay, and we're going to be looking at some examples in just
rips out the harness here.
If you could not do that.
Wingman out there, holding it.
So I already mentioned
my wingman. He was just trying to body block there. They're
this is the wrong VOD. It's the one afterwards. This is a different one.
still able to get the util. The fight and shake are getting chaotic.
Yeah, this is the one. This is a completely different one. I apologize. The one that I was thinking of is on Breeze, but this is a completely different example. We can all just kind of work with this one. Okay, like I mentioned, it was giving me problems earlier. Okay. So let's just get started. I want you guys to pay attention to both teams. I want you to pay attention to what exactly it is that they're doing and just give me their overall goal. Doesn't really matter which. You can kind of give an example just from anybody here. And I'm going to try to maximize this screen, and I know it's going to give me problems, but let's give it a shot.
Like, this is awesome, and see how the players are just kind of regaining control of what's been happening in sight. We start this one off. Again, the focus from Loud starts with this B hit. They tempt it, they cascade, go with the drone, and see what they can get out of a fight here. Because Sentinels, they've been given that peek. TenZ will be there, or Zekin.
Yeah.
They're trying to get a first kill.
That type of round reminds me of Pearl all over again. Trying to play double controller of the Pulse Planet. Everybody's playing lineups and sprays through smokes. You're just crossing your fingers to actually get the diffuser.
Just need some Odins.
Exactly.
Start spraying.
At least it's been working for both teams. Sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some, but it's a clean slate in round number 9. 4-4 our scoreline. Sadak trying to push forward off. And the orb coming down on the defense. TenZ only has it shared alone. Underhand flash information. But Kaladazine, they were ready for that this time around. Kaladazine and less. All comes out. Denial. Attempt of a plant. But Sadak still is able to put it down.
Wow. Loudest thing so much farther forward. staying 2 yellow, still pushing out from long. Nice util kill. Zelsis is just dancing and dodging in there. Nice kill by Kaunzine.
Who gets a third in the round. Even Sadak, I mean, the trades are nice. The position's great. It does allow John Q to get anything done inside of his own pit. So he's gonna.
All right, so that was the round. Can anyone tell me what the main purpose of Loud was? They were pushing up. They held this area. What do you think the whole point of this was? Any takers? No takers?
Maybe they like wanted to get the spike down so they could play back and kind of defend it.
Yeah, that's one way. Okay, we can kind of start looking at how they wanted to go B. It was a B execute, so they wanted the B side. It would be a lot easier to spam. You're right. Maybe they had read something along the lines of, you know, John had his Viper's Pit. Maybe they were thinking about that. Any other takers?
I feel like they were just trying to establish B main control.
They've been given that
All over again, trying to play double fingers to actually.
You can see right at the beginning,
Wait.
they're looking at this. What kind of playstyle would you define Loud right now as?
I would say passive, actually.
Yeah, I would say they're pretty passive right now. I'm pretty sure that as time goes on, we'll see that they just like to stay on the more passive side. So yeah, pretty much. Yep. So what we're looking at here is if we were a team that was looking at Loud in this particular scenario, and we're like thinking, okay, well, this is the kind of team that they have. This is what we're going to be looking at. Our entire dry run strat is going to be, we're going to try to get the plant ASAP. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to slowly work here, play off of a contact, and then see if we can take B. Okay? And this is basically how you would interpret plays like this. What is the main thing that they're trying to do? They're playing slow to try to see what the enemy team is going to do. And we're going to be looking at an example as well, much later, of what happens when you've already read a consistent play, right? So this is one example of that. We're looking at this and we're thinking, okay, we can look and we can wait for a pick.
Sometimes you win some.
Okay? And you can see that
alone.
they actually just get the pick, okay? They get the pick even though they're kind of pushed up.
Underhand
There's,
flash
a little
information.
patience there. Tense tries to catch them off guard. It does not work. But at the end of the day, they're still able to make something work off of that. Because now they have a read. It's another B. They like to counter the plant just by using Viper's Pit, thinking that they can make them rotate off into a team that's already holding A. Doesn't work out, right? When you're looking at dry running, you got to make sure you're kind of looking at each individual element, starting from the big picture. What side are they hitting? Okay, what reads do you think they have? Okay, Viper's Pit was one of them. Even the casters mentioned, you know, they might start needing to spam down. They might need to start using something like Odin's, right? Stuff like that. Really necessary to kind of look at. Okay, so this is just like the macro look at of everything. We're gonna be hitting here. Pay attention to the utility that was used. That was the next thing that I really wanted to mention. When you're looking at the macro side of things, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to what sort of utility is being used when you're taking an area.
This is awesome, and see
right
how
off
the
bat,
players are just
we have wall,
kind of regaining control
then we have
of what's been
Cascade
happening
being
in
pushed
sight.
in with the obvious purpose of preventing anyone from yellow.
We start this one off again.
This is what causes these guys to have a protocol of thinking there's noise on B. We're going to go from strong side A to strong side B by pushing a player over on B.
Focus from Loud starts with this B hit. They tempt it, they cascade, go with the drone.
After this, they drone, making sure that, you know, their players can kind of scale up
And see what
while still watching their flanks.
they can get out of a fight here, because Sentinels,
This is
they've
the
been
big
given
picture.
that piece.
These are the big moving pieces. This is what everything is supposed to be done in order for them to be able to accomplish this play.
Tens will be there, or Zekin.
Yeah.
They're trying to get a first kill.
That type of round reminds me of
This, we kind of see that over some time, if no one's contesting and maybe we notice that this orb is about to go out, if there is anything, maybe there's a smoke, maybe there's something. We can wait for this smoke and then place down our wall.
Pearl all over again, trying to play
Oh
double
my
controller
gosh.
of the post planet. Everybody's playing lineups and
After
sprays
this,
through
you can kind of
smokes.
start analyzing
You're
things
just
like,
crossing
okay,
your fingers
what
to
do we
actually
do if
get
they
the
don't reply?
diffuser.
What if they don't try to push anything? Notice how these guys already have that plan. We already have 2 pings being given by Loud. Noticing that these guys over there, I'm going to be looking at this angle right here. I'm going to be looking at this angle right here, right? Using these VODs in this way is going to give you a huge advantage in just identifying what the big picture is. Okay, so look at utility. Look at the timings, look at what they're looking for, maybe look at the reads, and then just again, what was the whole point of it? They were hitting B. What makes them rotate off? What makes them not rotate off? Secondly, let's look into the micro side of things. Let's look at it from the example of tents. I heckin' love tents. Okay. When you're looking at each individual element alone, you got to make sure you're breaking it down to the smallest, most minuscule movement. And this is where micro comes in. This is where min-maxing hits its biggest wall for a lot of players. Okay. When you're paying attention to the strats that you're making, when you're paying attention to the strats that you're borrowing from some of the pros, or maybe the tier 2 scene, or maybe a team that you just really like, that you notice that are playing really well, what you need to start paying attention to is how exactly is each player moving.
And see how the players are just kind of regaining control of what's been happening in sight.
Take orb.
We start this one off again.
And immediately starts noticing noise, rotates off. So what your brain is thinking is, we're going to try to get contact, no contact, I'm going to take orb, no orb. We have orb, we can now rotate off, right? These little checklists that you're going to be building off of yourself is how you build individual protocols. And this is how you should be looking at creating a playbook, okay? So you're looking at everything that is done at the beginning to get that overarching goal of B site, and then we can start looking at each individual player. Right there, those were 3 different check marks that we just ticked off, okay? We checked for information, nothing. Then I can move on to the next little bit, okay? It's a flow chart. If I can't make this here happen because they shoot down the knife, then I probably can't make this move happen, or maybe there's a different move that they're going to make. And this is where observing different different games within the same map is really, really useful. So let's say I'm somebody that really wants to teach my team how to play Icebox. I would show them this game, and then potentially another game where they played Icebox, right? So this is a really strong way of getting started and paying attention to the little minute details.
And the focus
Over
from
time,
Loud.
as an IGL, maybe as a captain, as a coach, regardless of which one you are, you got to make sure that you're able to kind of lead your team to keep these protocols as simple as possible.
Starts with this B
This
hit.
was just 3 decisions. Maybe Tens is thinking of 10 different things he could do. He could stay here in jail. He could push up. He could task his Gecko to flash again, just for more information, right? There's a lot of things that could happen, but just keep it simple. We got our goal out of the way. We got the orb. We can move on, right? So this is the important aspect of how
They cascade, go with the
macro
drone.
and micro. Does anyone have any questions on this one? It's a pretty dense slide, and it might happen later in the future where I have to reintroduce this concept, or maybe just develop it out more fully. But this is something that I really want to make sure that you guys have now settled down. Does anyone understand the concept of macro and micro? Anything at all? This is a good place to ask questions. No questions? Perfect. Okay. Nope, I knew that was not going to work.
And see what they can get out of a fight here, because since
Yeah, that seems to work. Moving on to the next slide. So this is the last slide that we're going to be looking at, and this is counterplay. When you're creating a playbook, it is going to be really, really difficult, to be quite honest with you, to be able to create every single play in the world. It's going to be really difficult to create a play that fits every single scenario. And this is where you have to make sure that you're paying attention to the autonomy of your players. If you're noticing that there's some players within your team that like to make really irrational decisions, then they need to make sure that they have some work done to some degree, whether it comes to making their own protocols, or maybe it's something of playing a little bit more with the team in terms of dry runs, right? This is why that synergy in that core 3 really matter, because they need to be able to read the body language of those. That being said, when it comes down to actually playing in the field and actually playing a game, you got to make sure that you establish these protocols early. Most of the protocols that you can set in stone are you can easily read them, or most of the time they're the most probable play. We're going to be looking at 2 rounds or 3 rounds. I don't remember how many rounds you need to kind of look at to make sure you really get the point. But we're going to be looking at a play that Sentinel does towards mid. And then we're going to be looking at how Karma Corp decides to respond to it. And then we're going to look at how the Karma Corp response is then countered by a Sentinel's response. Okay? We're going to see how they can essentially keep playing this game of chicken of who starts the play, and it gets to the level of who counters what. Okay? So
Pieces with that head-to-head.
Yeah. I mean, what? Tens has moved off the Yoru on.
Okay, let's see if I can push this forward. So we're going to be looking over here at mid. We're going to be looking at the way that Sentinels decides to play this. Okay. Pay attention to the next couple of rounds. We're just going to be looking at the rounds through. I'm just going to be giving some commentary.
Zekken picks up the judge. He was talking about how much he was playing that on Split during his rank game since being in Madrid.
Okay. This is round 3. So Sentinels is going to be a lot weaker in their buy. So these guys over here, you're going to notice that they mostly have full shields all throughout. They have a full buy. Generally speaking, this is where most of the teams tend to just win the round because they have a better buy, more money being spent, better guns.
Advice he gave me in Korea.
In order to be able to counter that, they instead
games,
try to
force
use
the judge.
weapons that are really strong against the enemy team in close quarters. So they decide to pick mid.
See how it works for him.
Getting in their face.
Notice how they already read, hey, there's already a smoke down in the middle. Keep that in mind. That's going to show up again.
It was definitely working out the other day in their match versus
Get some jumpy things.
Heretics. Trailblazer straight in the middle, up the gut, through the side.
Dog out. Okay, so we kind of start reading that the second that we're making a little bit of noise, the second that we start using things like that, we can respond to it.
Prowler knifed. Zekken, he's set up for success and even more. He's
Takes
deep
some
now.
space, takes control of this
Fox in
area.
the pen.
We talked
Looks
about
like he
in one
wanted
of
to try and
our
overextend, but now
tackles,
here we go. An attempt to try and re-clear into mid. Trip, Broken John might be in some trouble. Has to call for some backup and reinforcements. Fights happening all over the bloody place, yet still the movement is clean. Satchel there, Trip in his face.
We can see how the entire team already has taken all of sight while still keeping a lot of them held back over here.
It still wins that one out, but the side has been fully taken. Territory now for Sen. Chemical forced to slow it down now. Side by side, Narrate and Shin going to be holding hands through this one, but they've got a lot to chew through.
This one way that Shin's looking to pop, very difficult for the post planners to deal with. Celsius goes for a peek early on, trying to play Zekken in.
It's a bit of that information, yet close to Raptors, close to the corner. Narrate plucks him out. Now brings it to the 2v2 with an aid rebounding. Did they know? Did he expect it towards new box? Half clearance! Celsius.
Pretty unfortunate trade right there.
Just a one-and-done Shin!
When it came down to those necessary ones, they just couldn't clutch up. Okay, so what have we noticed? This is where counterplay starts coming into fruition. This is where you start paying attention to your playbook. If you're somebody that wants to min-max your team and you're looking at a VOD review of your own team and paying attention to what exactly went wrong, this is where we start kind of looking at how you can start making more protocols in the future. So,
Start to see
scenario,
But at the same
we saw how
time,
mid
much more
had
this
a little
round.
bit of a response.
Very fast feet early,
and
really rough.
they were able to kind of hold them back. We were able to kind of see how they were able to use the smoke over here to kind of slow them down. We know at this point in time that this smoke means that there's going to be a player towards male and potentially players over here because, I mean, we saw how John just got completely obliterated from that flank over here. So when you're looking at counterplay, you're looking at the previous elements that you saw in that play before. Okay, pay attention to how now they know that this smoke means player here and player here, and notice how they play.
Quite weak. Martin going to be set up in a 4 position. Has the gate crash. Just to back out in case it's necessary. Sentinels opting for a much slower beginning. A bit of spam exchanged. Led hailing down on either side.
And Casey's retakes have been fantastic. Both of these teams look amazing on the split.
We have longer range. We're going to be using that. We start using a smoke over here, kind of scare them out a little bit. Dog is out. Remember what I mentioned about Dog.
Retakes, but Sentinels will try and force the fights before that's even a possibility.
Flash.
Notice how they knew that there was a response from the Prowler, so now they're waiting back here. They're waiting for that reply, right? They don't see any Prowler, but they see a flash, and now that's prompting them to go, okay, this is where the fight's going to be taking place. Pay attention to how these guys position.
That's the repeat nades. The fly straight past each other. Zekken, he's already way further ahead than anticipated.
It's just so good. The way that he breaks the Prowlers whilst continuing to scale, whilst continuing to move forwards. He's done it with the knife and with the run and gun movement with the Phantom there. It just ruins what Casey are going for.
Mechanical ability off the charts. Tomsey feeling the heat, turned up, sent out the paranoia, but now backs away. Trying to play for the life. Giving up heaven control, gives up B as a result, but maybe I'll be able to just pick him apart from the side here. Is he going to get lucky with a few stray bullets? Not quite. Sassy. Minor bruises, basically. It's going to be that plant down now with 5 players.
At this point in time, we're already thinking, okay, so this mid area was really heavily crowded by the enemy team. We took that space. They all retreated. We know that they rotated around. Okay. Counterplay would say, hey, this is where we really lost. We lost against that heaven. Pay attention to how these guys like to position themselves against that heaven push.
Up and kicking. Martin holding that flash out wide. Magnum not expecting it, not anticipating it. Showstopper now earned.
This is what I'm talking about. Sen forcing the fights before the retake can even happen. The
already
swing
reading
timing
the
there
move,
from
right? They're
Zekken
forcing that
was
fight before
excellent.
they can make that
It
play.
shut this retake down before it could even begin. And KC were getting so many of these 4v5 round wins against
Simply one move, and they were thinking, no, they got us already. Okay. Just simply based off of that one move, they were able to coerce them to just save 3 guns, right? They still technically could have taken the fights. They still could have technically went in, but I'm going to give you guys one last wild card. This guy just got his ult, right? These are the things that kind of go into the play of what exactly it is that you need to do when you're creating that strat book, okay? Paying attention to a lot of the elements that happen in these rounds. And again, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of things that you have to pay attention to. It's a lot of things that you have to kind of like keep in mind, right? But this is just one example of what exactly it is that happens when you know one thing and then to the next, right? This is when we're looking at protocols. So like I mentioned, if you're a team that's struggling at creating those counter plays, make sure you're paying attention to that little if and then what happens, right? If X happens, then Y happens, right? We know this smoke happened right here. We know that these players were just going to be playing back there. That's what that smoke means. That smoke represented that they're going to be playing back there. They noticed that. They read that immediately. And like I already mentioned in a slightly earlier slide, you have to scout the enemy team, right? These guys practice with each other. They've rehearsed strats before. They do like to scrim with one another, right? Like these are things that happens in the pro scene. So it's very likely that they've already have a feel for those strats once upon a time, right? So we have to kind of pay attention to that area of the gameplay loop as well. Does anyone have any questions in terms of learning a little bit about countering strats? I know that it's also a very dense topic, but I wanted to touch into it. I've already talked about this before. These are the fundamentals. I will definitely be breaking this down a lot more in the future, but I want to make sure that we have a good understanding of it now with examples from games. Any questions before we kind of close this off? And I should kind of mention
FPX.
Oops. Any questions? Q&A period. Any questions? Or am I good to just close this now? Perfect. Okay. Seems like you guys just got it down. You guys seem to have nailed it. We're going to be jumping into a scrim. This one will be a little bit different than the others.